Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. My guest today is Steve Stoute, the president of Canisius University in Buffalo, New York. Steve brings a very forward-thinking mindset to his presidency as he and his colleagues navigate their role as a basketball-centric institution in a non-Power Four conference. Canisius has 20 sports teams for about 2,500 students. So they're right in that sweet spot where all of these decisions really impact the decision. My regular listeners may know that I have a particular research interest in schools like Steve's, as they have a vastly different mission and focus than more well-known schools. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Aaron, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the invitation and look forward to our conversation. This is a topic it means so much to me personally as a former student athlete. I played soccer in college, and that opportunity, that experience, the chance to compete at the Division I level had so much to do with, one, me going to college, and two, me pursuing higher education administration as a path. And so the evolving landscape is something that I'm quite attentive to professionally as a college president, but also personally because it's the experience that perhaps most shaped me on my path to the presidency.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I was excited to have you on the podcast. I don't meet many presidents who were student athletes, and you were a Division I student athlete in soccer. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. That, Division I looked a little bit different at the time. But yeah, I immigrated. I'm a first generation college student. I was an international student, so I immigrated from Trinidad and Tobago. I played soccer at Seton Hall University. And Seton Hall was and still is in the Big East. At the time, early 2000s, it was the old Big East. Right. And so Syracuse and Boston College were in the Big East. And obviously, conference realignment has taken shape since then multiple times. And so the Big East today looks very different than the Big East did 25 years ago when I competed. And I think that touches on the work that you do and kind of where we are in college athletics today. That wave of conference realignment kind of flows from some of those economic transactions that conferences and institutions tend to drive.
So let's jump right into spending and revenues, because those are the two things that drive athletics programs at this point, particularly Division I. We've got challenges on the college sports finance side, but we also have challenges on the university finance side. Talk a little bit about that overall picture from your perspective.
Absolutely. I think for institutions like ours, and so Division I, but like you said, non-Power Four conferences, and we know this, right? That there's so much data out there on this. Our institutions don't make money on athletics, right? We operate athletics programs for other benefits, whether that's student experience, community engagement, alumni engagement, fundraising, so many reasons Division I institutions operate athletics programs at a loss. And so that's kind of positionally, that's where I think, that's how I approach athletics is we have about 400 student athletes of our 1,600 undergraduate students, approximately. So about a quarter of our undergraduate students are student athletes. And they bring so much with them to Canisius in terms of their experience. They're exceptional students. And I always start my conversations with our athletic director, our coaches, our trustees, talking about student athlete, really the student athlete model. Our student athletes are students first. They're exceptional students. They engage in the classroom, in the community, and they get to compete at a high level. But funding that program is something we have to be more and more thoughtful about, and understanding how does that financial model fit into the framework of our broader institutional mission. And that there are more and more pressures as our institutional budget comes under pressure. So many externalities we can talk about: demographics, federal funding, accountability, borrowing and borrower debt. So many things that are happening to put pressure on institutions like ours. We have to renew our sense of athletics as mission critical. And that's a question that we're discussing constantly. So the costs are what the costs are. And so every year we expect that it costs more to travel and for hotels and officials. The cost of operating a Division I athletic program increased every year. And the revenues don't always increase in an associated amount because we are not generating significant broadcast revenues or ticket sale revenues like some of our peer institutions in the Power Four conferences. So that's really the challenge. The expense, the cost side continues to go up, and the revenue side does not increase in an associated amount.
So, building on that, you all made the decision to opt in to the House settlement, knowing that you're going to face some challenges financially as well as even in the landscape, even in the conference you're in. So, walk us through a little bit of the thinking behind opting in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we initially decided to opt out. When the deadline was in April, I think we decided to opt out because of the roster limits that were associated with being a part of the framework. Because again, for us, athletics is also part recruitment tool. And so we launched a new program this year in acrobatics and tumbling. And our new head coach has already recruited 25 student athletes to start the program this fall. And so athletics, Division I athletics, still is a recruitment tool for us. So the idea that we would have to trim rosters in some of our sports in order to opt into the framework was enough of a concern that we initially opted out. But once the judge, I don't want to say forced, but once the judge ensured that the parties addressed issues for current student athletes, we felt comfortable that we could opt in and provide an opportunity for our student athletes to generate some additional resource through an NIL framework, and for our coaches to support our student athletes in that way, particularly for us in the sports of men's and women's basketball and ice hockey, men's ice hockey. Those are our sports where we said to our coaches, there's a real opportunity for you here if you engage with your donors and our supporters through philanthropy in a strategic and intentional way, but also if you manage scheduling effectively as well.
How have your donors received this new era, particularly in those three sports?
Yeah, I think a sense of excitement. To be honest, I think we had a number of donors who were concerned about our commitment to Division I athletics, having initially opted out, and so it's an ongoing challenge for me and for our athletic director to articulate to our donors that we remain committed to Division I, but we need more help now than ever to compete. And what we mean when we say compete is different. Compete today in 2025 is different than it was in the 1970s and 80s, where Canisius had a nationally renowned athletic program and basketball program, right? And so we want to be realistic and transparent with our donors that when we say compete, we mean compete for MAC championships. And if we compete in the MAC at our level, then we're in with a chance at an automatic bid to the postseason. MAC for basketball and Atlantic hockey for hockey. But we're not talking about compete in the sense of, we're making deep runs in the tournament or we're competing for national championships in those sports. Because I'm on the record as saying this, I think, unfortunately, the evolution of Division I will make it less likely that institutions like ours are making deep runs in the postseason because the economic scales are imbalanced.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because you had a great line in one of your public appearances. You said March Madness could turn into March Sadness for some leagues, and which is a very honest statement. I mean, that's just it. I talked to a lot of presidents about this idea that Cinderella lives. I don't know if Cinderella lives anymore. And that's something I think we have to adjust our mindset to as well.
Well, I would agree with you.
Yeah. A lot of schools are looking at raising student fees, doing tuition increases, obviously increasing donations. Are you also looking at things like upscaling your facilities to try to drive a higher ticket price and or engaging in outside capital, i.e. private equity, private credit, those kinds of things?
No, not on the athletic side. I
Okay.
think what we've said to our coaches is to the extent they can generate the resources externally through philanthropy, then those resources are dedicated to the talent acquisition and retention. Right? It's no longer. I really don't think about it as recruiting in the sense of student athletes were historically recruited. In basketball and hockey, and I think that's why we've seen the advent of general managers on college campuses. It's talent acquisition and retention. I remember Nick Saban doing an interview and talking about how different his living room conversations were with prospective student athletes. It wasn't about coming to the University of Alabama and getting a really great education and developing as a young person, a young man. It was, how much money can I get out of this transaction?
Yeah.
Right. And so it is a transaction. And for us, yes, we have opted in, but we are still mission-centric, mission-focused. And so we're not going to change our funding mechanism necessarily to support this, but we're going to give our coaches as much flexibility as we can within reason to generate the resources that are feasible and realistic for Canisius to acquire and retain talent to compete at our level. And so that hopefully that means we connect our coaches with the right donors who are willing to invest in our facilities, upgrade some of the facilities to help make a better student athlete experience. And we've done some of that, right? The locker rooms and video suites in terms of our student athletes being able to study film, et cetera, but not at the scale that I've seen at other institutions in our competitive peer set even. Who've made real substantial investments. We're slightly more realistic in that sense.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think about you were at DePaul before you came to Canisius, and the city of Chicago is just anxiously awaiting an entirely new football stadium at Northwestern. Which usually you think they'd be talking about the Bears, but that's aside. They're worried about the football stadium at Northwestern because it's going to be so much smaller, but it's going to have more premium experiences. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And when the DePaul moved to Wintrust Arena, so DePaul historically had been at Allstate Arena out near O'Hare Airport. And so in 2018, the year before I got to DePaul, DePaul, through a public-private partnership with the city of Chicago, moved downtown in the loop to Wintrust Arena, which is now where the Chicago Sky WNBA, they compete there. While I was there, we moved women's basketball down there as well. So the men were always there. The women moved there. And it is an incredible facility with the amenities that you would expect from a city like Chicago at an indoor basketball-centric arena. It's a great place to watch a game. It brings people downtown and restaurants and bars and nightlife. And so the businesses and the city also benefit from that. And so I think where there are mutualistic relationships that can be forged for shared benefit, I think it makes sense to explore a different capital structure for our institutions. It'd be it'd be really interesting if something like that came about in Buffalo, because Canisius is in the city. We're on Main Street. Unlike some of our other regional peer institutions, Canisius is in the city of Buffalo. Now, the city of Buffalo itself has its own kind of economic challenges. But if the city were to come up with an opportunity to say, hey, we have a partnership and Canisius and another entity can call this space home, that'd be interesting to explore, because 40, 50 years ago, Memorial Auditorium downtown was home to historic basketball games between Canisius and Niagara and St. Bonaventure and other Division I powerhouses from outside the region. But I think that is, for us right now, it's not something that we see as possible. But it has worked. It worked at DePaul, certainly, where the city was a driving force behind moving DePaul downtown because of the benefit it had to the tax base and the businesses in Chicago.
I think that's a great point, and I'm really glad you shared that observation, because I'm hearing more and more conversations, even in today's New York Times, huge article about not just Atlanta's Battery, which is where baseball plays, but now where the Falcons play, whole nother development around entertainment and housing, including low-income housing. There's such synergy here that I think universities can be a part of.
Absolutely. And that's I think that's one of the benefit of universities, right? To bring that kind of education, research, community engagement perspective to some of these public investments and public developments. And, you talk about Atlanta. I had an opportunity to visit Detroit last year with other civic business leaders here in Buffalo. We went on a kind of exchange program, and Detroit did similarly, where Ford Field and the hockey arena and the baseball stadium are downtown, and new businesses are sprouting up, and Main Street revitalization and housing development, and cities that partner with a broad network of organizations in that way are ones that are making significant progress for their residents and for their citizens.
So one of the things that I noticed on the conversation you had at the University of Toledo was you said something with such pride. I loved it. You said, I am a girl dad. And so therefore you focus on outcomes for women athletes as well as male athletes, which I haven't heard too many presidents talk about that. And you sit on the NCAA committee on women's athletics. Talk a little bit about that.
And I was excited to get a chance to speak with you, because I know in your background, you're a pioneer in women's athletics as well, and kind of early in the Title IX era. And I think we've unfortunately lost sight of how critically important that legislation was in reshaping not just college athletics, but reshaping athletics in this country. When we think about our Olympic team, and just look at the data, right? We can talk about it in the abstract, but the data is there. U.S. female athletes win more medals than male athletes. And in team sports, whether it be basketball, particularly soccer, my sport, our U.S. women's national team, they are the flag bearers. Yes. And so Title IX has a lot to do with that. And one of the things I talk about on my campus with my athletic director, with my trustees, is in this changing Division I landscape, because of the House settlement, because of NIL, I'm very concerned about the impact on women's athletics, and I hope to be proven wrong. I hope that people who are making the decisions, particularly when it comes to resource allocations, make them in a way that are consistent with our values in terms of women's athletics and their import and our appreciation for them. Because I want that for my young daughters who love sports already. I want them to have an opportunity to compete at the highest level, and to do so in a way that is consistent with what their male peers will have an opportunity to do. And so that's something that has always been important to me. It was the topic of my research project, my thesis in graduate school at North Carolina was equal pay for coaches under the law in North Carolina and under federal law. And so it's really important to me that continues to be a consideration in this ever evolving landscape. And you probably know it better than most. I don't think it is. At this point, I don't think it is.
I agree with you, although it has gotten better. But usually, as the women's coaches of women's sports go up $1, the men's sports typically go up $2. So it's a gap that just never quite seems to be closed. But still, coaches, particularly in the Power Four right now, are making a lot of money, whether you're coaching football or you're coaching cross country and track and field. A lot more money than I would have ever imagined. So yes, there's that. But then there's the pressure too. And you have to be sure that you give coaches the resources to be competitive. And that's not just about salaries, but that's about staff. You mentioned earlier general managers. That's coming in certain sports. Athletic training, mental health, nutritional support. How do you keep up with that at Canisius?
Yeah, that's a great statement and question. And our coaches are really good about helping us understand the market. And so understand what other institutions, the institutions we compete with in our conference, in our geographic footprint, what are the resources that they are bringing to bear on their athletic programs. And so, what my athletic director and I talk about is understanding what we can afford, what are the right places for us to make investments, and it usually comes down to the student athlete experience. And if we can make investments to help elevate the experience, you talked about mental health and athletic training and nutritional support. Those they can sometimes be viewed as little things, but they make a difference to the athlete's ability to perform at their peak when you need them to. And so those are the places we've tried to make investments to help our coaches, but help our student athletes, get the best out of this Division I experience and represent the university in the best light. But the bar there continues to be elevated, and in some ways, it's kind of keeping up with the Joneses, right? Training tables are getting more and more sophisticated, and there's even on campus, right? Broadly speaking, student mental health is a concern nationally. I don't know a single colleague president who isn't thinking about how do we support this generation of students that's under so much pressure to perform in so many ways. Support them with their mental health, because that's it's a critical barrier to their academic and personal success. And I remember reading an article that there's no amount of resource that's sufficient to invest. You can't hire enough mental health professionals because the demand will just continue to grow. And so it's something that our coaches are keeping abreast of in terms of best practices and and where the advancement are taking place. And it's something my athletic director and I are constantly discussing in terms of, in the best interest of our students and the student athlete experience, how do we invest in a way that allows us to reap the greatest return on investment for the institution?
Yeah, it's a big question. When I talk to a lot of presidents, that's exactly what they're trying to figure out right now. And sometimes they realize that they're up against kind of like an uncertain ending, because just when you think you've invested enough in this, somebody else invests more in this. And the athletes and their parents start valuing things a little bit differently. And I appreciate that you mentioned mental health, because so many athletes their families put enormous pressure on them to perform, to exceed, to get NIL money, to prove that you're the best, to possibly look for a better deal in the transfer portal. How does your athletic director and staff work with the coaches on managing that kind of pressure?
I think open, transparent conversations has been the approach our athletics program has taken. I remember not this past year, but 2 years ago, our hockey coach was, I think, unique because he was able to return everyone from his roster the prior year. Didn't lose a single student athlete to the transfer portal. And he talked about that in the sense of the culture being built in recruiting. And so parents and students understood when they signed on to come to Canisius, this is what we're building. This is where we compete. This is what you can expect here, and we are going to deliver on that expectation. I think where some programs get into trouble is a mismatch of expectations. You set the bar really high in terms of promising student athletes or promising parents something, and then don't deliver on that. We are fairly consistent, understanding that we are who we are, and we own that. We acknowledge that, and we're going to deliver at that level. And we may slightly outperform it if fundraising in 1 year it is incredibly successful, but we're not going to promise you something we can't deliver. And so I think our student athletes and our parents respect that and appreciate that. But you're absolutely right in that, at the end of every year now, families are looking for a better deal. And institutions at our level of Division One, the risk is we become a farm league. And so students and families come here, they test the grounds, and if they're successful, the goal is not to stay at Canisius and graduate from Canisius and build something here. The goal is to use this 1 or 2 years to platform into a upper mid-major or a Power Four the opportunity. I think that's unfortunate. I always joke that the competitor in me, the athlete in me, I want to play, and so you couldn't offer me any amount of money to go sit on the end of the roster or the end of the bench at a school with a bigger brand name. Like I don't want that. I want to play and I want to compete, and so, but this generation of students might be a little bit different than I was, and probably you were as well.
Absolutely. There's no question. It was hard enough for me over 4 years way back then. I can't imagine how competing the pressures are today for athletes. You mentioned something earlier that I want to pick up on. You have been part of the NCAA Committee on Women's Athletics, so you're familiar with how the NCAA has worked. A major shift happened over this summer regarding governance of voting power, weighted voting, and it appears that in the NCAA governance structure for Division One, the number of bodies at the table has shrunk. They've grown the numbers of student athletes, but only in football and men's basketball, unless I'm missing something. But also, the autonomous four, the Power Four conferences, if they all vote together, comprise 65% every single time there's a vote, which means that school conferences like the MAC and the Big East and Atlantic 10 and others are always going to be on the outside, no matter if they all band together and vote. So how does that make you react, respond, feel to the fact that it's no longer one school, one vote?
Yeah, I think that is, putting NIL aside and the House settlement and that new framework, the thing that is perhaps most concerning to me is governance, and the shifting governance model that we all can acknowledge does not represent the majority of Division One. And so I think the real decision making, the real transformation, the real transformation in college athletics is yet to come. I think this decision, this new governance model and structure, it's not sustainable. And so the autonomy for have a different view and a different idea of what college athletics is and should be. And the other conferences, the CCA 22 and others, need to think seriously about, are we aligned enough to maintain this association, right? Because that's what the NCAA is meant to be. It's a voluntary association, but you need some core agreement about what the missions, goals, objectives of that association will be. And I don't think, I think this new governance model reflects the power that's vested in the autonomy for institutions, and not necessarily what is in the best interest of all of the institutions in Division One. And so it's economic. I think it reflects the economics of Division One, but it's not just in athletics, but in most avenues. It is a very dangerous game to play, making decisions based on economics rather than values, mission, best interests of the broadest number of people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have real concerns with the new governance model. I want to be fair and give it time to be tested. But when it's structured around economics and economics first, I find it hard to believe that it will be successful.
Yeah. Yeah, I have real worries about it too, because obviously one of the reasons the group stays together is March Madness and the funding that comes from that and the opportunities that come from that. But what happens if they decide to take their money with them and vote their money to go with them? Where does that leave the vast majority of institutions that are Division One in terms of postseason experiences, name recognition, all the things we talk about athletics as being the front porch of the institution? What are your thoughts on that?
That is essentially the hypothesis that I posed in the piece on March Sadness, which is what is keeping the association together is the NCAA, is the Division One men's basketball championship, and the idea that the MAC, you can win your league, you can win our conference tournament, and get an AQ and have an opportunity to compete in the NCAA tournament. And have, to your point, gain some real national exposure and recognition for the institution, for those student athletes, for the community, right? When you have institutions like ours that make a long run, like St. Peter's or Oral Roberts, or going back now a couple decades, George Mason in early 2000s, and VCU before that, like that lifts an entire community. And we are going to move so far away from that model because with the expansion that's being planned for the men's basketball tournament, those additional berths aren't going to the mid majors or the low majors. They're going to be consolidated in the SEC and the ACC and the Big Ten. And what that means, it's even more difficult for institutions like ours to even pretend to have a level playing field. And so I think it's unfortunate. But again, the economics suggest that some people believe that institutions like ours don't add enough value to the NCAA tournament. Yeah. I look at the data and I would question that. And the data suggests that viewership of the NCAA tournament, the ratings, significantly higher in the early rounds than in the later rounds. And it's because people want to see the small school stand a chance. Yeah. Like can a 16 beat a 1? It rarely happens, but it's happened. Or 15 beat a 2. They don't want to see a Final Four with the 4 number 1 seeds.
Yes, which is what we had this year.
Yeah, that's what we'll end up with more and more, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. I'm going to ask you one final question. You're in your first presidency, but I would argue that you've come in with more foundational understanding about college athletics than almost any president I've talked to, whether they've had 1, 2, or 3 presidencies. So I work with a lot of folks who think they want to become college presidents. So what kinds of advice might you give them if they want to learn and understand more about athletics and engaging them and in the institution in this process?
That's a great question. I would say read. The pace of change today is so drastically different than anything we've seen before. The landscape is evolving almost on a daily basis. And so read broadly in terms of your sources of information, engage in conversation. This conversation has been incredibly insightful, and I've learned a lot in preparing for it as well. But engage in conversations, and we talked a little bit before we started the recording about the symposium that was hosted at St. Joe's in early April. Unfortunately, I was unable to be there. But those types of convenings, bringing together people who work in the field, they are critically important to understanding what the future of athletics looks like. And so that's read broadly, engage, and there's so many opportunities to engage. You don't always have to get on a plane and go somewhere. You can engage in through podcasts, webinars, but inform yourself. That's always the thing that I took from advice from early mentors in my career is being very informed on the topics that shape the work and the world that you engage with. And I still think, as challenging as it is, and you get to do it with students and with young people, as do I, it is the most rewarding work that we can do. If I can call it work. It's the most rewarding endeavor, vocation, is to be in a setting where we are engaged in supporting young people and providing opportunities for them to access their fullest potential through education and through athletics. And one of my early mentors, Gary Walters, who was the athletic director at Princeton, Gary always talked about education through athletics. And I really do believe that. Athletics is an educational endeavor. The things you learn competing, there are very few places you learn those lessons, and they will serve you well no matter what you do in life, no matter what size corporation or company you go to work for. Those are skills that are really marketable and incredibly valuable. So I would say that to young people aspiring to the presidency who perhaps don't have the personal experience that I had with athletics, is you can read, you can engage, you can learn, and ask questions. I think it's always really fun to be in a room with people who are genuinely curious and asking questions about a subject.
Yeah, agreed. Steve, this has been a fascinating conversation, a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me and my listeners today. I really appreciate it.
Karen, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed it. I look forward to continuing to learn from you and with you as we continue to navigate what is an ever-evolving landscape in college athletics.
Absolutely.